Good morning and welcome to today's Trading the European Open live here at the Live Trade Room. Now today is Wednesday the 19th of September. So without further ado, if I could draw your attention to our risk warning and to just explain what this particular session is all about. We look to master price action, so we've got a methodology that we apply to identify high probability trading opportunities. We go through a method for us to execute trades with consistency and discipline. We manage our trades by looking to let cut our losers short as quickly as possible, but then looking to let our winners run with one view, and that is to book in consistent returns when we trade these markets. So please do take a brief moment to familiarize yourself with the risk warning currently up on screen. And before we begin, let's do a very quick review of potential market moving news. The reason why that is very, very important for us as traders is because we want to know if there's any news events that could impact our ability to generate consistent returns. Now, I suppose the big event over the course of the Asian session was the Bank of Japan. Now, no significant change. I suppose what's interesting for the Bank of Japan is that they're very much behind their peers in terms of the Fed aggressively increasing interest rates. We've had increased rates from the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, and the ECB are planning on ending their bond buying purchasing program towards the end of this year. So clearly other central banks are making steps and moves to move away from accommodation, whereas I think it's firmly in place for the BOJ to continue that accommodation for perhaps a lot longer than they would ordinarily like to. Okay, so without further ado then, as we look through the rest of the morning, we have a CPI, a significant inflation-based figure, CPI coming out at 9:30. So that's likely to provide a lot of volatility for the British pound. So we'll be coming back to this at 9:30 to see if that will lend itself to any particular opportunities with regards to the pound. The pound has been relatively strong fairly recently. Going into this number, will we see that strength continue, or will we actually see some weakness creeping into the British pound? So we shall monitor that event very carefully. And in the latter part of the afternoon, this is all UK time, we have Draghi due to give a speech at 2 p.m. On the future of economic policy in the euro area. So that could be interesting for the markets. And we have crude oil inventories as well. And later on this evening, if anyone's trading the New Zealand dollar, do beware of the GDP figure, which is expected to be slightly positive, 0.8%. So let's see how these events unfold as the trading day continues. Okay, so let's get straight into the charts then, and let's have a look. So when we say that we have a process for us to identify high probability trading opportunities, we don't just look to get into markets ad hoc. There's a coherent approach behind the way that we identify markets. Obviously, there's an awful lot of markets to choose from. How do we cherry pick? How do we focus on the right ones? So what we can do is we can just start with the euro dollar, and what we can see is just very, very choppy intraday moves, moving higher, moving lower, moving higher, moving lower. We had a strong rejection off yesterday's highs, and today now we're getting a bit of strength coming back in as things currently stand. So of course that could change at any moment. Okay, so we've got a bit of buying coming into this to this market. What would be interesting for us is that if we saw a 30 to 40 pip rollover to the downside, we'd be looking to get in to this market, expecting this to create a bit of a double top and see if we get a bit of a rollover from these highs. We do have an ascending line, as you can see, which has the potential to provide resistance at these levels. So let's see how price reacts with that price, with that level over the course of the morning session. Moving on to the British pound, we'll come back to the British pound at 9:30. As you can see, an attempt to strengthen against the dollar, but nothing significant has occurred. We would be advocates of buying this above the 31.71, and I think it's fair to say potentially below the 31.20 as well to the downside. Now, we are straddling the weekly high, so we're flirting with weekly highs. So if you look at this on a weekly time frame, for example, we'd expect continuation, and we're in the process of getting that. So, and I suppose it's also important to note that we are just in this pullback phase off the lows. Certainly, if you look at the weekly time frame. So, with all this in mind, we're going to come back to the British pound because we might see some interesting moves today in the British pound. The dollar yen has been strengthening recently against the yen. I suppose with the Bank of Japan news announcement, there was potential for volatility, depending if the Bank of Japan were going to, I suppose, make any new statement about their monetary policy. And if that was the case, we were likely to get a little bit of volatility in these markets. But we have this market just sort of hanging around these highs really against the dollar. So recently the yen has been probably the weaker market, the weakest market out there. Looking at the dollar Swiss, we do prefer and we do like this market to squeeze lower. We're actually just above the weekly low, as you can see on this chart, and not an awful lot movement just yet. So we can certainly keep a sort of a casual eye on it. Now, a market that is presenting with an opportunity would be this market here, the dollar CAD. So we're going to look at this on a smaller term time frame now very shortly. So it's a straightforward pullback off the low, attempting to make a new low, small pullback, and then we're getting now the extension move. Now we're likely to see a little bit of resistance around this area down here. So we wouldn't be looking to stay in this market for long periods. If we get a nice move down to the downside, we'll absolutely look to trade that. So we'll definitely come back and look at this market, and we're just rolling over in the last 3 or 4 hours. We're just rolling over to the downside, as you can see, and we're currently at those lows as things stand. Okay, so we will come back to the dollar CAD. We do want to look at that in detail. Now, a market that is strengthening against the dollar, it is a pullback trade, so maybe a different approach to risk management for this market. I think it's fair to say that we can look at the potential for resistance in this market. You know, we wouldn't be too close from the potential for resistance in this market at a slightly higher price. So we can bear that in mind when if we decide to take an opportunity in this market. So we'll come back and look at this. This will be a short-lived potential buy trade above the weekly high, the 72.35, and we're currently potentially toying with these new highs in this market. So we'll see how we get on. So we'll come back to the dollar CAD and the Aussie dollar. The New Zealand dollar attempting to break out above this level. I think we'll focus on the Aussie as opposed to the New Zealand, but potentially a short-term buying trade exists. Effectively, we can certainly have a look at it. So we'll go into that, but we'll probably choose one or the other, not necessarily trade both at the same time. The euro pound, yesterday's price action was, we saw some strength come into the euro against the pound, and then we saw the pound really kick on to the downside and reverse that big move. Now we're getting a bit of retracement once more. The level that's important for us is that if this market turns around and trades below the 88.70 level, that would be interesting for us. And we do have the news event, the CPI news event coming in at 9:30. So an opportunity very well may exist to the downside if we get to see some pound strength. So we've got a couple of markets to focus on if we see pound strength over the course of the morning session. So again, would like to come back to that. Same situation for the pound yen. We do, there's every potential that if some strength comes into the pound and the yen continues to weaken, we're likely to get a nice strong push to the upside. So again, all the pound pairs this morning we would like to come back to and perhaps have a real strong look at during the CPI data released at 9:30 UK time. The euro yen strengthening again against the euro against the yen. Expected to push up to these highs, the 131.47. We're just trading these intraday highs and lows, so we're still below yesterday's low. So one to keep an eye on, but perhaps not a really high probability trading opportunity for us just yet. The gold market is effectively moving sideways and has been for 3-4 weeks. So it'll be interesting to see what happens on a global level with regards to trade with the US and China, the trade war. So it's likely to provide a little bit of strength potentially on the fundamental side for the gold market, but we do want to see technical follow through, and if we don't get that, then of course it makes it very, very difficult to get into this market during these really tight range. US oil threatening to push higher, and you can see as well we had an uncomfortable pullback towards the latter part of yesterday's trading, and we're seeing sort of continuation to the upside as things stand. We're still below yesterday's daily high, so that's an important marker for us to focus on. So we'd like to come back to the US oil on a number of occasions today. Yesterday we saw some strong moves in the US equity markets, a bullish engulfing, so a break above the 29.16 would represent an interesting opportunity higher in the S&P. Pretty close to seeing that in the Dow Jones. If we start seeing some continued bullish strength creeping in, you can see that the bullish nature of yesterday's candlestick in the Dow Jones market. Very, very erratic price action for a part of yesterday. Really strong moves higher and lower before we had a decent range from high to low to high to low and then to high again before we actually got the move. Just a little bit on the choppy side yesterday afternoon, but of course we've made the move to the upside and now we're moving sideways. So continuation to the upside in the Dow Jones could definitely be worth looking at for us for the day. So we look at the Dow Jones higher. Same situation for the Nasdaq. We had a good winner on this yesterday before we pulled back, and now we're attempting to push higher once more. So that a break above the 75.27, just a little bit above that if I remember rightly. We'd expect continuation to the upside. So let's see how we get on with those markets. The FTSE 100 is attempting to break above the weekly low. Now, we certainly don't want to be making any decisions on this pre the CPI data due out, because if the pound strengthens, we're likely to see the FTSE weaken, and if the pound weakens, we're likely to see the FTSE strengthen. So an opportunity may exist above the 73.35. We do want to exercise a bit of caution, but we'll come back to it hopefully very shortly. And the Eurozone, the Euro stocks just pulling back off the lows, running into these levels of resistance here at these prices. So just more interesting to see what's going to happen with this market as the morning unfolds. Maybe not an awful lot will happen and we'll get just a really tight range with very little movement. So so we've got a few trades to look at. The first one being dollar CAD. So what we can do is we can look at the dollar CAD in the top left hand corner of the screen. Another market we're looking at is the Aussie dollar. We quite like this above the 72.54. We appreciate that the dollar CAD is already drifting lower, as you can see at these levels. Now the other two markets we can continue to look at the New Zealand dollar as well. We'll just piggyback it with the Aussie dollar. So we are attempting to squeeze higher, even if it's briefly. So we will come back to these now in just a few seconds. Let's see if we break these highs. And certainly break these lows as well. Just checking the high of the dollar CAD, which is a 29.59 level. And a break below that 29.50 would be constructive for us. Okay, let's keep an eye on these, and we'll just put out some of the other potential opportunities for us. So I think it's worth keeping an eye on the Dow Jones. And for that matter, we're a little bit off with regards to the S&P. And so the market we'll focus on then is the Dow Jones, just above yesterday's high. And we can just monitor the Nasdaq market as well. Yesterday's move was perceived as just being positive. The move for the US to put some tariffs. So we're currently breaking below, reluctantly breaking below in this level. So let's see if we get a confirmed break below the 29.50 level, then we're happy to get into this. So it's attempting to break lower, isn't it, as we look at this market. Okay, so we've got a little break below that level. Followed by a little bit of a reversal so far. So we just want to see that market conform. We'll look at the Dow Jones market in some detail. And the FTSE is worth keeping an eye on above the 73.35. So we'll continue to look at a few of these levels. So quite happy to look for an opportunity in this market now. If we just break beneath, so we've got the close below the 29.50 level. And if we get this market just squeezing lower one more tick, we'll look to sell this market. So let's go in and position ourselves. So it's very small stop loss. So 29.57. So we've got a 9 pip stop loss in this market to see if we get extension to the downside. When we look at the daily time frame and we zoom in for you, you can see that there's the potential for this market to continue lower. Would have been the high probability trade would be below yesterday's low of 29.72. So we are getting into it 20 pips below the actual high probability trade, but we still expect this market to continue lower, so we might get a nice little push to the downside over the remainder of the trading day. So let's see if we can get into this, and let's see if we can run this trade down to these levels. So currently experiencing a bit of a pullback to that 50 level. So we wouldn't be overly surprised if the US market doesn't move with any significant aggression. And we'll see if the FTSE can squeeze above this weekly high. It doesn't look like it's able to as things stand. So we're looking at a couple of daily time frames. Really, let's have a look at the Aussie dollar and the New Zealand. Right, both of these are still struggling to break above this particular handle. So hopefully we'll get some moves in the pound pretty shortly. So what we can do is we can go in and just see, we'll identify exactly what's happening. We've had a bit of a grinding market over the course of yesterday to the upside. And now, crucially, we're actually above the 72.35. So when we look at this on a weekly time frame, we can we now know that there's a bit of strength coming into this market, and actually breaking above the highs of the previous 2 weeks could give this market a little bit of a push higher. You can see the descending levels. So this is not one of these markets where we'd like to be in for too long. But it could definitely give us a bit more of a short-term opportunity to the upside. And what we can do is we can see the spike to the upside. We can see the double top here. This very well may roll over below the 72.35, and if that happens, we can discount it as a potential opportunity for us. But if it breaks above, again, the 50 level, the 72.50 level, we're just above the 72.54, we'd be looking to get into this market, and we could have probably a 20 pip stop loss on this trade if we decide to take it. So this is the level, the 72.54, to see if we get a continuation to the upside. So we're getting a pullback off this low currently. We do have this high creeping in here. And it's a very similar analysis for the New Zealand. We're currently above the weekly high, the 65.95. We've kind of created a double top now, so it'd be interesting for us to see whether we get a break above that 66.08 level, currently up on screen. So we can monitor these from afar. Very simply, guys, we want to try and get into these markets, and we're happy to take small losses, because when we get the moves, and it's been sort of difficult market conditions the last couple of weeks, which has been surprising. Normally the month of September can be really explosive. Now yesterday and I think 1 or 2 days last week we had some decent market opportunities to capitalize on. So hopefully we'll start to see some big moves in these markets where we can look to let those winners run, get into them, have a really sort of fairly short and snappy risk exposure, and where we're looking to sort of take profit in terms of a multiple of our risk for the trade. And on a risk management perspective, we know exactly how much of our capital we're committing to the trade. So as you can see, we're a little bit off the 72.54, so we obviously need to be a little bit patient. This is our trading plan. I'll get out the, we're looking to buy the Dow Jones above the 26,316. We'd be equally looking to buy the FTSE above the 73.35 level. It's a weekly high as well. Regarding the Aussie dollar, looking for that to buy above the 72.54, getting a really strong pullback off the low currently for the dollar CAD. Irrespective of whether this is a losing trade or not, we still expect this market to continue to the downside. So maybe it's just a case of reassessing or looking for another opportunity to take this to the downside. So we're currently just pulling back off these lows. So it'd be interesting to see if we get any, if this market creates a bit of a structural high. And see what the next move is. So what we don't want to see, we don't mind the pullback to these levels if it creates a bit of a high, but it's the next attempt lower that's going to be quite interesting for us, because if we fail to break beneath that level, we start getting a reversal, then we don't want to be in this market to the upside anyway. So we've got a couple of opportunities to sort of manage this trade effectively. So hopefully a few opportunities to work with today. We're able to capitalize on a couple of opportunities yesterday. Even on a minimal basis, we're still trading at kind of minimum risk levels. There's just I suppose the major problem is there's a lack of sort of coherent strength or weakness. We're getting certain markets strong against others, and against some markets and not others. There is sort of contradicting information coming from maybe other sources, other correlated markets, and all of a sudden it just builds an incoherent kind of picture. And it's under market conditions like that we like to just say, right, well, okay, if we trade these markets, we're going to try and keep our trade size low, and we're going to try and get into these markets without risking an awful lot of our capital. So, and if as a result we may take a number of really small losses, but when we get those winning trades, they compensate for those small losses that we incur. So that seems to be more the approach that we're kind of adopting right now. On fast-moving markets, we can often get into these trades in the mornings. We could ride them for the rest of the day, and literally look to let them run. But we're sort of micromanaging trades a lot more often recently, which I think is important. It's important to do that right now. Not have a casual approach to these markets at the moment. Be very risk averse almost, or certainly protect capital, because when these markets do start to open up, we want to have the capital available. We want to be able to leverage as much capital as we can to get into multiple trades. So it is effectively par for the course. Okay, I just posted a little note there into the chat box. If you do have any questions, guys, or you want to say hello, or if you've got any trades that you'd like to look at, then please do use the chat function and do say hello. So okay. So of course we trade the markets technically, and I suppose some of the benefits of that is we have a pretty consistent approach to our entries, and sometimes we experience these pullbacks. Pullbacks are part and parcel of trading. There's no, markets, downward trending markets move in that way. So to say that you don't want to experience pullbacks or you're uncomfortable with them, just something you need to get used to. And that's why we kind of look at these highs, and we just build in a bit of a margin to just cover us if we just get this little sort of move. So now we've got the structural high. So and what we want to do is to see this market break this low in here, the 29.48. So and this is where our ability to identify these high probability trading opportunities come in, because there's only one thing that we want to do with this market. below the 29.72, and that's sell it. So we can discount buying opportunities. We're not looking for those type of opportunities, and if we get into it, we have to ask ourselves, could we get a good 2-to-1, 3-to-1 profitable trade off this market? You'd have to say that the reality of that is real. So hopefully we're not being too unrealistic by suggesting that we could get a nice little push lower in this market. So, and that's what we really want to do. We want to just look to stack the odds in our favor when we trade these markets. So now we're getting the little close below that level, and hopefully we'll get some continuation to the downside. So nothing really in the Dow Jones or the FTSE market. The Aussie dollar threatening to push higher, isn't it? It's currently at the 72.50. We're now just slowly getting this little break in here on a 15-minute time frame. Let's take a note of the low. 65.97. So the problem with the New Zealand dollar, it's kind of a slow grinding market. So there's a bit of support of price creeping into this market. We're currently getting a pullback. Let's continue to watch this market and see. So what we'd like to see in the dollar CAD is potentially just a little push higher and then the flush to the downside. So we've got this high up here. Hopefully this doesn't become a kind of a double bottom trade. If that's the case, it's just purely a small loser, a kind of a blowout to the downside, or should I say a fake out trade to the downside, where it's threatening to push lower and kind of reverses and creates structural failures to the upside. So not an awful lot you can do with trades like that, just apart from mitigate your loss as much as possible, and we've certainly done that with the dollar CAD. So let's see if we get a bit of a pullback from here. We get this little roll over to the downside. The 29.50 is likely to provide a little bit of resistance. So let's see if that's the case. So apparently a few of you are struggling to log in to your YouTube channel to be able to post comments and things like that. What we understand is that obviously if you have a Gmail account or a Google account, you can log in, you can add an account. So when you log into your YouTube channel, on the right hand side, top right hand corner, you can add an account and sign in to your YouTube sort of account basically, and that will enable you, so when you post a comment, it'll be from a verified source and things like that. So okay, and I think it just stops sort of bots and things like that operating. So yeah, it's just a case of just logging in to your YouTube account, sign into it, and if you've got a Gmail account, I think you can use that to get into it, and then you're able to post comments as you wish. So do bear that in mind. So we're just in this sort of sideways pattern for the Aussie dollar. New Zealand just pulled off those highs, so we can certainly exercise a little bit of caution with those for sure. Let's just have a quick look at the pound and see what's going on with the pound markets. Potential strength creeping in against the dollar, selling off against the euro, and potential strength again against the yen. Such a lack of sort of volume and volatility in the Asian session. We're not really going to get into this prior to the CPI data. We'd much prefer to position ourselves after that news event. So by the looks of it, it does look like we're going to get a little push higher in the against the dollar and the yen. Because the euro is stronger than the pound, we're seeing the euro strengthen against the dollar and also against the yen market. So we've had a little move in the euro. Now it's running into a number of levels of resistance. So the euro yen has this sort of level in and around these sorts of prices, the 1700 level. And the euro dollar, should I say, and the euro yen has the same kind of levels to try and negotiate. So let's see if the euro dollar can try and make a move above the 1733. So we shall wait and see on that one. So we shall have a strong focus shortly on the British pound. And see if we can capitalise on any opportunities this morning. So we've made a marginal new low. So now we want to test this market and see if we're going to make a marginal new high or not. That's obviously wouldn't be a good situation for our trade. So that's the important level now, 29.54. So there we go, we've got this market threatening to break above it, so kind of a double bottom. So this is the price action that we don't want to see, which is if we get a close above that level would be the likeliest movement in this market then would be to the upside. So this is not what we want to see unless we get a strong rejection, potentially like this. So let's see if we just get continuation to the upside or not. Dow Jones is not really that interested in seeing continuation just yet, and I think the FTSE's in the same position. So now we just kind of got to trade what we see and just wait for those opportunities to arrive. We know what we're looking to do with each of these markets. We just need price action to conform for us, and if it does, then we'll make money. And if it's one of those days where we just get continued choppy conditions, then we might take a couple of losing trades. We'll have to wait and see, but we keep our losers, we cut our losers short as quickly as we can, and we look to let our winners run. Most of the time, it must be said. Most of the time. That's the way in which you can successfully grow your capital if you adopt that kind of approach. People, of course, do have different ways of trading these financial markets, I suppose. Because this is an educational environment, it's we're live trading with live capital, real capital. That's an important part. We're not trading with a demo account or anything like that, and that's an important part of the learning curve. Understanding the psychology of trading with live capital, and under situations like that, especially when you're starting out, it should make sense to adopt an approach that is lower risk. And then as a result, lower returns. So you'd have scalpers trading these markets and taking much bigger size, looking for much smaller returns. That's fine. That requires a little bit more experience, and those sorts of strategies still come with significant difficulties. So it's not necessarily an easier path to take, but certainly from a psychological perspective, smaller risk, smaller expectations of growth, and try to be a little bit more active in these markets, and look to let those winners run. And if you get those opportunities to do that, look to take them. So really what we're looking for is 5, 10, 15 pip losers and 30, 40, 50 pip winners. So that's effectively the difference between the two. That's cutting your losers short as quickly as possible and mitigating risk as quickly as you can. We're not able to do so yet on the dollar CAD, but maybe that's the case shortly. So we're struggling to close above that 29.54 level in the dollar CAD, as you can see. Excuse me. So not an awful lot happening in these markets at the moment with the pound dollar, just moving sideways at these highs. Let's have a quick flick through these. Euro still strengthening against the pound, and the pound not moving really against the yen or the dollar just yet. Oops, excuse me, let me get that back up on screen. So this market is bouncing off these lows now. So clearly not an awful lot happening. The CPI data from the UK at 9:30 is likely to provide a little bit of volatility. Of course, we're going to continue to stay. If the oil markets increase, we're likely to see a bit more support for the Canadian dollar against the Aussie, against the US dollar. So that's likely to be supportive of our trade. We're still struggling to close this market above the 29.54, so that's kind of a positive in this trade. But as you can see, we're effectively moving sideways, certainly since the beginning of this session. So we'll leave this running. Not really seeing enough for us to get into the New Zealand or the Aussie dollar, even though we wouldn't be too far away from breaking above the 72.54. We're only talking about sort of 10-12 pip move And the Dow Jones, well, all the US stock markets and the FTSE are really not doing an awful lot at these levels. So what we're going to do now, guys, we're going to switch across to the live trade room. It's the top of the hour, so we will be looking at the dollar CAD. We will continue to manage that trade, and we're going to look at really strongly at the British pound and see if we get either continuation in the pound strength, or perhaps we'll start seeing some weakness start to creep in to that market. So we shall pack it up there. This market is still looking, for the time being, as if it's reluctant to close above that 29.54, but let's see. This is only on a minute time frame as well. So please do feel free to read the details in the description below. If those of you that would like to join us, we're currently offering a 2-week free trial, and we have over 76 different live webinars every month, should I say, and you'll be able to gain full access to that. So now we're getting this close above these levels, so this may be a trade that got into for the right reasons, but it's now creating some structural failures to the upside. So maybe it's just time to have a good look at the British pound and the build up to the CPI and see if we can capitalize on some moves there. And we might be able to get other opportunities to get into the dollar CAD. I mean, we're still in the trade, but we're now sort of seeing structural failures to the upside. So potentially that's a 9 pip loss. But not an awful lot happening this morning, to be fair. As you can see, it's a little bit on the quiet side. So definitely we do prefer trading more volatile markets than this. So listen, thanks very much for joining us. I do have a read in the description below. And if you would like to join us on a regular basis, it's just $9.99 per calendar month. So hopefully you'll find that very rewarding and also very, very affordable. So on that note, thanks again for joining us. Do take care. We'll be back again at 1 p.m. through our YouTube channel. So if you wish to connect with us, do subscribe or give a thumbs up to this session, and do subscribe to our YouTube channel if you can. And you can also connect with us through Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. The details are all there up on screen. So all that's left for me to do now is to thank you very much for joining us. Do take care, and we look forward to seeing you next time. We'll be back at 1 o'clock. See you then. Bye for now.